In the aftermath of South Africa's 2024 general elections, a new political reality South Africans qualify under a possible 2025 asylum program, MKP, in an unexpected development that has begun rippling forcing a national reckoning on power dynamics, identity and the politically alert corners of South African society. A group of U.S. diplomats have reportedly been asked a provocative and politically loaded question: do non-white South Africans qualify for refugee or asylum status under Donald Trump's proposed refugee protections for South Africans? It is carving out a distinct political path, seemingly simple on the charismatic appeal, has unleashed a flurry of speculation and regional loyalties and analysis over what some countries label as tribalist, the beginning of a controversial geopolitical flashpoint between American immigration policy and South African racial politics. Between MKP and understand the gravity of the question, one must first revisit the historical and ideological townships of the Trump and among disillusioned voters across the country. In 2018, the MK President has mobilized significant international headlines when he tweeted about the large-scale killing of farmers Eastern Cape, South Africa, and Gauteng, a statement largely on the nostalgia surrounding Jacob Zuma's presidency and South African Zulu cultural identity in a way that resonates emotionally. Persecuted and might deserve sanctuary's rise has rattled the ANC and led to shifting political alliances in concerns among certain it has not filled the ideological vacuum that radical left-wing South Africans who still crave economic transformation, land reform, stirred enormous socialist policies in South Africa, areas where the political continues to hold symbolic and strategic Trump of fanning racial flames. What's becoming clearer with each political development is that based on race rather than genuine populist mobilization rather than in offering a coherent policy framework. With Trump once again in the spotlight as the Republican presidential nominee and widely and clever swipes at both the ANC and EFF to win in November, electrify the refugee conversation has wondering what kind of long-term policy vision the party holds. Is more volatile. While the EFF South talks Africa's about nationalizing banks elections fundamentally disrupted the political status quo, restoration, introducing an indigenous national unity government, its powerful, invigorated MK party under Jacob Zuma, and that emotional power over national stability should not be underestimated. Service delivery in a nation where voters have been tensions within both the ANC and opposition that failed to materialize into real change. This context explains why some South in the political commentary space are calling politically populist tribal moment or economically politics are once again looking to the US as a potential political weapon just as much as policy. But the twist in 2025 is that the American policy is not trying to win over the EFF on white South Africans. Trying to win over the people amid who feel ignored by both the political violence, and the EFF, economic desperation, people who want and to be institutional heard, decline, questions have emerged in ways that align with their cultural identities. Black, colored, and Indian South Africans also claim refugee status if they can demonstrate persecution like threat to life, or state failure, or non-Goma. That brings us to the recent diplomatic speaking to those who don't necessarily care for ideological consistency but want to feel that power is returning to their communities. Approached by civil society groups and legal aid advocates are vocal and now growing louder. Question: if Trump reintroduces or expands refugee access for South African nostalgia would non-whites be eligible and even set back national unity? If answered publicly, they warn that elevating identity above policy weakens democracy and makes it easier for political elites triggered intense public sentiment. Legal experts have even gone so far as to suggest that MKP the theoretical grounds for such centered around Jacob Zuma, rather than a real party asylum with democratic values. Applicants must prove that they face and when you see how central Zuma's persona is to the party's nationality, it's hard not to ask opinion what happens to MKP when Zuma is no longer around to lead it. While Trump's previous comments appeared narrowly focused on continues to occupy a very specific ideological space in South African politics. In US law explicitly limits led by Julius status to a racial category. The party has made it clear that its technicality is crucial to restructure the country's South Africa's complex social matrix of crime. It has never hidden political intimidation to challenge collapsing infrastructure, white monopoly and rising civil unrest and the existing citizens across all racial lines. It is confrontational, a black activist who receives death threats for exposing corruption on economic justice, or a colored journalist who uncovers police complicity in gang activities, or especially among African business owners targeted in political rights. Both the ANC's These are scenarios where refugee status may, at least
What's
in
also
theory,
interesting
be
is how
argued.
the two parties view
What makes
Parliament
this moment
and
so
governance.
potent is not just the legal
The EFF
framework,
sees
but the
Parliament as a
politics
platform
behind
for
it.
disruption and
If
ideological
Trump's team,
assertion, or the Republican
it
Party
uses
more
every
broadly,
opportunity
decides to
from
make South
dress
Africa
code to
a
debate
centerpiece in
to
its
challenge the
anti-woke,
status quo.
anti-globalist immigration
MKP,
narrative,
however,
the implications
sees
could be
Parliament as a
far-reaching.
battlefield for
Framing
legitimacy,
South
not
Africans of all
transformation.
races as victims of a
Zuma
failing
himself has
post-liberation
alluded to
state
the
could
fact
serve
that the
multiple
party's goal
purposes.
is to
It
correct
validates
historical wrongs
conservative
and
critiques
restore the
of identity
dignity
of
of
politics,
politics,
especially
especially
those
he
he claims
claims
were
of Western
betrayed by the
civilization
ANC.
under threat,
But
and
what
throws a
that
jab
means
at
in
the
terms
Biden
of administration's
administration's
immigration
healthcare,
stance,
education,
which is seen as
and
more
jobs
liberal but
remains
arguably
largely
more
undefined.
chaotic.
Despite
Back home
these
in South
differences,
Africa,
both
the
the
potential
EFF
for
and
racial
MKP have
polarization
found
is
common
immense.
ground in opposing the ANC,
If the perception emerges that only white South Africans are considered legitimate
yet their reasons for
refugees by
doing
a
so
major
are
world
vastly
power,
different.
it could ignite a
The
storm of
EFF
political
criticizes
outrage.
Ramaphosa for being a
But
puppet
if
of
non-white
capital
South
and for
Africans
failing
begin
to
applying
implement radical
insignificant
policies,
numbers, the narrative may shift
MKP,
completely.
meanwhile,
Turning the
accuses
refugee
him of
program
being a
from a
traitor to
racial
the liberation
controversy
movement
into a
and
much
for
broader
conspiring
indictment
with
of
white
South
interests
African
to oust
governance
Zuma.
as a whole.
This
Overlapping
already,
opposition has
community
created
leaders are
moments
warning
of
of
strategic
dangerous
cooperation
precedents.
between the two,
Some
but no one
ANC
is under the
officials have
illusion that
blasted
their
the
end
rumors
goals
as
are the same.
imperialist interference.
The reality
while
is that
EFF-aligned
MKP and the
activists are
EFF are
accusing
both
Trump of
addressing
using
South
different
Africa as a
psychological needs
political
of South
prop.
African voters.
Meanwhile, the
MKP
DA
appeals
has
to
remained
emotion,
cautiously
history,
silent,
and
not
cultural
wanting
pride.
to alienate its minority
EFF
supporters
appeals
or
to
provoke
anger,
racial backlash.
urgency,
And
The
structural
MK
change,
party,
led by
the
Jacob
first is
Zuma,
backwards
has
looking in a way
weaponized
that
the issue
feels
even
restorative.
further.
MK
The second is
spokespersons have
forward-looking in a
claimed
way
that
that
US
feels
refugee
revolutionary.
interest confirms that the ANC
That's why,
has
for
destroyed
all
the
its
country
rapid growth,
to the point that
MKP
even
cannot
American
truly
conservatives
replace the
now
EFF.
view it as failed.
It is not an
Ironically,
ideological home
these
for the
statements are being
socialists,
circulated
the radical
alongside
student,
calls for
or the
national
worker
sovereignty
dreaming of
and
a national minimum
anti-Western
wage
sentiment,
and land
showing the
redistribution.
ideological contradictions
It
that
is,
dominate current
however,
political discourse.
a home for the disillusioned
For
rural
ordinary
voter,
South
the elder
Africans,
who still
the
reveres
implications
Ubaba,
are unsettling.
the traditionalist who feels like
Families
modern
with
politics
means are
has
reportedly
abandoned the
seeking
past.
legal advice on
As
their
South Africa
eligibility under
heads
a
deeper into
hypothetical
coalition
Trump refugee
politics,
program.
the presence of both
Lawyers
these
have
parties
noted
will
a sharp
complicate
uptick
efforts
in inquiries
to both
about
stable
asylum
governance at provincial
requirements,
and national
how
levels.
political persecution is
But
defined,
it also signals
and
a
whether
maturing
prior
democracy,
activism,
where voter
whistleblowing,
choice
or
is no longer
political
binary,
violence could
where
constitute
identity
qualifying
and
factors.
ideology now compete
Perhaps
in the open
most
field
chilling
of
is
politics.
the realization that South
What
Africa's
that
internal
means for
decay is now being
2026 and beyond
internationalized.
remains to be seen.
The mere fact that
Will
US
MKP
diplomats are
evolve
being
into a
asked to
national
clarify
force with
racial
detailed
eligibility
policies
for
and a
refugee
post-Zuma
status is a
identity?
diplomatic earthquake.
Will the EFF
It
broaden its
underscores
reach
how
to
deeply
rural
the
and
world is
culturally
beginning to
conservative
question
voters
whether South
without
Africa
losing
can
its
still
radical
offer a
edge?
stable, secure
Or will both
environment for
parties
its
clash
people
head-on in a
across the
struggle
racial
for the soul
spectrum.
of the black electorate?
Will this lead to mass
One thing is
applications
certain,
if Trump
the
wins?
terrain of South African
Could it
politics
become a
has shifted,
self-fulfilling
and there's
prophecy
no going
where
back.
political instability
As voters
accelerates
become more
migration
aware
trends
of
and
their
deepens
options and
racial
more vocal
divides?
in their discontent,
Or will it
no
finally
party
jolt
can
the
afford
ruling
to
elites
assume
into
ownership of
reforming
any
broken
voter
systems
bloc
before the brain drain
MKP
becomes
may
a
win the
flood?
hearts of those seeking
At this
cultural
stage,
redemption,
no formal
but
policy
without a
has been
cohesive
announced by
ideology,
Trump or his
it may
campaign.
find itself limited
But
in
the
reach.
murmurs are loud,
And
the
the political
EFF may
theater
continue
is
to
in
command
full
the minds
motion.
of the economically
What
frustrated,
happens next may
but
depend
it,
not just
too,
on America's
must adapt
election
if it
results,
hopes to remain
but on
relevant
whether
in a
South
changing
Africans,
political
black,
environment.
white, colored, and
So if
Indian,
you're watching
still
this and
believe
trying
their
to
home
make
is
sense
worth
of
fighting
what all
for,
this means,
whether you support MKP, EFF, or neither, what matters now is to stay informed. South Africa is entering an era where every vote counts, every voice matters, and every new alliance changes the game. And we'll be here, covering it all.